Hi, I'm Andy Johnston, Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for your Grand Rapids Chamber. We recently held the Grand Rapids Policy Conference where Mayor David LaGrand was one of our featured speakers. And we had so many questions from the audience that we couldn't get to at the event. And he was gracious enough to do this video to tackle some of those questions for you, our members, so you can get a better understanding of what the mayor's thinking and how he is planning to engage with the business community. So, Mayor, thanks for joining us. So we're just going to jump right into it. One of the key things you talked about at the event was on the topic of loyalty. And if the business community remains loyal to the city, that'll be a good thing for the city. Yep. So one of the questions we got was, how can the city remain loyal to the business community? What kind of perspective do you think leaders here today should have to attract, retain, and grow our businesses?
Well, I've said before, and I'll say again, that it's great to get new businesses into town, but really retaining the folks who are here, you really want to reward people who have already invested in our city. And so a culture, one of the things and many people know, I have a number of businesses in Grand Rapids, and so I want Grand Rapids to be loyal to my businesses. And so one of the things that I say about the employee-employer relationship, which might relate to the city and employer relationship, is people don't work for you primarily because you pay them. Primarily, they work for you because they feel appreciated and valued and respected. And so building a culture where we lead with that acknowledgement and respect, and I think is foundational. Now, that being said, I think we also have to have a problem-solving culture in city government, and I think that it's very easy for people who are in control points or power points to feel like they can prove that they have power by saying no. And I am really urgent that at every juncture we build a city government that is trying to get to yes and is trying to build partnerships with and problem solve with businesses that are in the community, because we live in a community where businesses can move, people can move. Mm-hmm. People have to choose our city every day, and businesses have to re-choose our city constantly. Right. And so remembering that institutionally is, I think, the most important thing. And then also, whenever you're recruiting a business into town, you've got to be thinking like, okay, so how does this affect the people who are already here? Do they feel appreciated? Do they need the same level of support that we're giving these new things? So you really can't just be chasing the next new bright, shiny object.
Yeah, that kind of responsiveness and customer service is what members want to hear.
Yeah.
Even if the answer is sometimes no, they can make that decision. Business can make that decision and then move forward.
Yeah.
Along those lines, one of the questions we got from somebody in the audience was, how can the city lead in attraction and, quote, stickiness of downtown restaurateurs? We're seeing a number of our restaurants, closing. We're also seeing another number opening as well. What can the community do? Maybe what can the city do with this tough industry right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, the community can just go out and eat more often.
Right.
I think that as far as the restaurant climate goes, and I own some restaurants. One of the things is that we saw some great ideas in COVID that prevailed afterwards, like going outside, activating sidewalks. Those were all sort of COVID things, but you look around at good urban ideas in other cities and you realize like outdoor spaces are great. One of the things people really like is to be around other people and to see other people. And so a restaurant with, dark windows and you can't see in, you don't know if anybody's in there or not. You don't know if it's closed or open. If there are people on a patio out in front, it's a very different energy. So I think the city can really lean into policies that promote that visibility. I think the social districts that allow you to walk around with a cocktail after you've finished dinner, those are good ideas. I think we always got to be responsive in problem solving. Now, another problem that I experienced directly years ago when we ran a coffee house was if you close a street down, that can be really traumatic for business, and construction can really throw a wrench in things. So I think that and maybe at the CID, which is the neighborhood level business district support, or BID level, we should be talking about essentially set aside money for supplemental aid for businesses when construction happens in the neighborhood. Right now, those entities do work on facade grants and they do street beautification, but I think think of them as sort of an insurance fund is not a bad idea, because if we know, I mean, we know no given road lasts forever. All roads need periodic redoing. If the city is, and they take years to plan. So it's not like the city wakes up some morning and says, let's rip up Division. They've been thinking about it for years. The business owner who just put a new shoe store on Division may not have, gone to all the planning meetings and found out the street was about to get ripped up. So with the best will in the world, somebody could be investing in an area where they don't know what's coming. And that can really throw a wrench. But existing businesses.
Yeah, we saw that with road closures the past couple of years. So going forward, that would be a great idea to support businesses in those key corridors. Shifting a little bit to housing is something you've been talking about a lot. You just talked about it in your State of the City address again. What regulations do you think, this is a question from the audience, what regulations need to be repealed or reformed to spur more construction of houses? What would you consider your stretch goal in deregulating housing construction?
So the stretch goal is building a system where we ask ourselves, so in government, they came up with this idea, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, as though it was a new concept called zero-based budgeting, which is to say, don't assume that your, X department, your sewage department, needs $20 million next year because they had $20 million last year. You build budgets like that and people just will be like, well, we got $20 million last year. Let's add 5% and see if that gets. So instead of saying that, you break down, you crack the engine, you look at all the parts, you say, if we were starting from zero and we had to build up the needs of the sewer department, where would we get to? I think we need to do the same thing on regulations. We have to sort of ask ourselves, does this regulation address health or human safety? And if it doesn't, then there's a pretty steep burden of why do we have it anyway then? So for example, we've got regulations that say you can't have vegetation more than 12 inches tall in front yards. That's not because of some, the Ebola breakout of 2015. I don't know why we have that regulation. It's not because of rats. So if that's not got anything to do with health and human safety that I can figure out. And a lot of people want to do native plantings, which by definition wouldn't fit that model. So that's one where you're like, okay, if there aren't, remind me what the justification is for that. And if you can't tell me a justification that makes sense, we have all kinds of, it's an inertia problem. We have all kinds of regulations on the books, and you look at them, you're like, why is that there? So they're just, I could name you 20, but there are lots of individual regulations that don't meet that threshold. Now, then there are some, the harder conversation is where you have a regulation that maybe does have a health and human safety argument. For example, having 2 staircases in an apartment building. Well, yes, that's a health and human safety justification, but if the data doesn't support making that argument, you still have to re-examine even the health and human safety justifications. So,
is that something you think the departments can go through this year or something?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had we all know, not all of us, but a lot of us know, we just passed a city master plan, and that is going to lead to a re-examination of zoning. But I think there's the urgency of the now. I think there are things we can do now that if you look around the table and you bring everyone in and you say why, and there's no answer to the question why, well then get rid of it. I mean, the same thing is true in public safety, and we can talk about that in a minute. But
so along housing, you highlighted accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, as they're commonly referred to,
or garage to apartment. Maybe we should start calling them that.
What do you think will spur the creation of more of those? Because you highlighted that Grand Rapids has taken steps to reduce barriers to creating these accessory dwelling units. And you also highlighted that we need about 12,400 more housing units in the city over the next 2 years just to keep up with the current demand. So how can we see more of these ADUs be built?
So when you look at something like this, what happened was we stopped forbidding them. We didn't do anything wonderful to facilitate them. So we just said, hey, it's not illegal to convert your garage into an apartment anymore.
It's possible now.
Right. It's possible. But when 8 people do it citywide, you think, all right, why? So I think right now we got to get into the why. And some of that's going to be talking to people who did the conversions and asking them what were the barriers in your way. I am actually starting to go through the process of trying to get my garage permitted for an ADU so that I can find the barriers. So one of the barriers that I found right away was the assertion that any dwelling unit has to have a frost wall foundation, not a slab. Well, if you got a building that's been there for 20 years, the only argument for frost walls, just so the viewers know, is so your drywall doesn't crack. Like if you put drywall in a place and it heaves a little bit, your drywall might crack. Well, you can probably like have the potential people who want to do this, give them a leaflet, like you give them a leaflet on lead paint, or wear a seat belt or whatever. You could say, hey, if you don't have a frost wall, your drywall might crack. But I'd be perfectly willing to take that risk. I'm not going to tear my garage down so I can put a different foundation.
Right.
So that's one of those barrier questions. Financing is another one. So banks have to try to be very, very efficient. And one of the things they're really good at is taking your house or my house and saying, right, we understand how that works. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae can get involved. We can look at your down payment ratio. We can get an appraiser in. They've got a template. There is no template right now for how they finance ADUs. And I've talked to a couple of our banks in the community, and we need to work towards getting an ADU template. We also need to demystify the process. So when I first started driving electric cars, people would stop me and say, hey, what's that new weird thing? What's that like? Well, if you've never met anybody with an electric car, I wouldn't drive one, right? Like, it's great to have
people want to see the paved path, see how other people have done it.
Absolutely. So if you see something's viable, then it can take off, but we haven't hit that critical mass. So we could talk about this for the rest of this interview.
But we're going to be hearing more about it. It sounds like, and seeing more examples of it pop up. Continuing with housing, another question from the audience: how will your administration work with the business community through the Grand Rapids Land Bank Authority to address housing shortages, boost economic growth, and develop the community?
So here, I cannot say this more clearly and more emphatically. The test of whether a land bank is a good idea or a bad idea really comes down to two things. One, are we seeing actual more housing supply in the community? And are we seeing the costs of construction get driven down because of activities of the land bank? The other is, are things getting into the private sector quickly? So the land bank cannot be an acquisitive model that starts hoarding land. That would be a disaster. The test has got to be, can we move things faster from non-use to facilitated use? And so that's the acid test. Now, in that context, I think there are a number of opportunities to get underutilized land unstuck. So, and I'm sorry, a lot of this is geeky, but
that's all right. That's all right. We're doing long form. It's okay. We get a little geeky.
Okay. So here's a geeky example, and it's a history lesson. So in the 70s, when we had urban blight, 70s and 80s, Grand Rapids had problems then that Detroit has now, and we don't really have anymore, which is to say we had land that had in the city that people did not really see value in. And so I was born at 734 Union, on the corner of Union and MLK, roughly. And the house next door to us burned down. Now, nobody came along and said, wow, there's an empty lot here. I can build a house. This lot's obviously worth $100,000. It wasn't worth $100,000. It was worth nothing. And there were tons of those lots around the city. And the city didn't want to get stuck with an empty lot that they had to send somebody out from parks and maintenance to go, mow one random lot in the middle of the city. And so they had a program where if you live next door to one of those lots, you could buy it for $1. Now, the reason the city wanted is to get them off their books, not have to do maintenance. So it was smart for the city at that point. Fast forward to the present, and you've got a lot of these empty lots around town, which people didn't really pay a lot of money for, which they don't necessarily value the way the market does. How do those get back into the market? Well, a realtor makes a 3% commission. If you've got a lot that's worth $30,000, is a realtor going to go try to find that person, do a lot of work, figure out how to modify the title and all that stuff for $1,000 commission? No, they'd rather sell your house or my house. So there's a disconnect or sort of a stickiness, because there are these now valuable lots out there. People may not know they're valuable. People may not have been asked, hey, would you rather have $30,000 than this empty lot next door? And if the answer is, of course I would, then we can get those back into circulation. So I live in Heritage Hill, and I took a walk around my house, 5-minute walk around my house, saw 12 obvious empty buildable lots. And Heritage Hill is a pretty thriving neighborhood. And you wouldn't think, I emotionally didn't think, oh, my neighborhood's filled with empty lots, but I went around and took a look. There were lots. I walked down Wealthy Street. I saw 18 obviously buildable lots. So there are in the city core, there's a lot more available land than people tend to think, and a central thinker, a central actor that can like unstick.
Just waking up every day thinking about that can help
Exactly.
unlock some of those.
Exactly.
So that could be a great spot for the land bank to play.
Exactly.
Especially, because people like to say Grand Rapids were built out. There's no more space.
I just don't think that's true. And I think that like a mom and pop investor, let's say you or I were like, you know, I've always wanted to own a fourplex. I'd like to build one. Well, we don't necessarily have the tool set to go find the place to buy to build a fourplex. But if the land bank sort of looks like eBay, and it's got a website, it's got all these properties that you could buy and build on, especially if they've been if the land bank has done the work to say get them pre-approved for a fourplex, to do a zoning variance because the lot's 2 feet narrower than zoning requires or whatever. If they can sort of pre-digest some of that regulatory stuff, drives down the cost of construction, facilitates investment, all of that good stuff. So I think it's it can be a real partner and facilitator for private investment.
Shifting gears to one of your other big priorities, public safety. A question that we received is, what are the city's top public safety priorities? How does that align with the most needed criminal policy reform at the state or county level? Something you've been working on for decades.
Yeah. So, look, the most important public policy thing in the city is that we keep our city safe. And right now, crime is really getting driven down. Great work there. And that is a multi-factor analysis, which I talked about in my State of the State, State of the City. There are community-based things we have to do. There are law enforcement things. There are things in law enforcement that we can do better. We have great leadership there. So all of that, all the complexity of public order is something where there are exciting things going on here, there, and everywhere. How it aligns with a state and maybe what my top priority is, or it really distresses me when so incarceration is something, it's direct state action, right? The government's not in the barbershop business. It's not in the restaurant business. It can facilitate, it can help there. It's not in the housing business very much. So all of that is laying the table, laying the groundwork, getting silly regulations out of the way, facilitating, which we've talked about so far. But locking someone up or not locking them that's the government. That's nobody else, right? And what breaks my heart is when we take relatively minor offenses and trip people up with them in ways that are catastrophic. So, and it's easy, I think, for the middle class and people above the middle class to not really see this. So if I spent a couple days in jail, we could probably call in sick. Maybe we could figure out a way that no one would ever notice. But people who are in jobs where they're no call, no show, if they spend 24 hours in jail, they've lost their job. And if they lose their job, they're quite likely to lose their housing, which is bad for landlords and for them. If they, it may have all kinds of implications for their family. I mean, their kids, their relation, their ability to care for their kids may be at risk. So you get this catastrophic failure out of things where you're like, why did we make that a criminal offense? So I do not want to see people in the community incarcerated, for example, if they get behind on their bills, and that happens. I do not want to see people incarcerated for things that don't rise to the level of public risk that would warrant that. So, for example, we still have in the books in Grand Rapids a crime that makes the way I've been saying this is we have crimes in the books that if you got charged with it, you would start laughing, but they're still in the books. So we have a crime that it's a misdemeanor in Grand Rapids to swear on the telephone. Right. So you didn't laugh.
I think I've broken that one. Yeah.
Exactly. So why is that in the books?
Right.
What public order?
Clean this up. Yeah.
I mean, that could be a civil infraction or it could be nothing. I think stepping off the curb before the light changes is a crime. Now, again, bad. Sure. Speeding is bad.
Unsafe. Sure. Yeah.
So lots of those low level things. We just need to ask ourselves, do we really with a straight face think we need to incarcerate somebody for this? And particularly because the less affluent you are, the bigger a deal it is if the justice system intervenes in your life. So
Shifting gears a little bit to public transit. Another question from the audience: how important is the potential expansion of public transportation to GR and its suburbs, and what can we do to expand our systems in a collaborative manner?
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting right now in this space, this is a space where I always want to try to be a futurist. So um, there are ride sharing automated programs at work right now,
Right.
places
Yeah.
like San Francisco. I think Tesla just got permission to do it in I forget what state, but like that is really rolling out. And that I think is going to be part of the bundle of how we do transportation in the future. So that's one of the things that I think we have to start thinking about and planning for. Um, the question of how we do public transportation better. Well, one of the things that's going on right now is a lot of stuff is coming to people rather than the people going to the stuff. So Amazon drops things off at people's houses. Myers and Costco will deliver food to your house. And so ridership's actually quite significantly down in our system, and it hasn't bounced back up since COVID. And our guess is maybe that's because people are getting their groceries delivered. They don't have to go to the store. Well, that is a challenge in and of itself for public transportation. So how we fund that and how we support it, we've got to be looking at it in urbanist terms. People talk about desire lines. We really have to be sensitive to where are the lines of use. And a lot of the conversation that's going on right now at the Rapid is where are the employment hubs and how do we get better transportation so people can really ride the bus to work. That's a real opportunity, but also the first and last mile transportation is a big deal. And that's where we've got some really exciting data on. It's surprising because I don't consume it myself, but scooters and e-bikes, they are really getting used. And we had a program last year where we let it be free for the month of July, and not surprisingly, use spiked. What was interesting was we stopped making it free, and it stayed at that level after it. So people tried it and they liked it. They found out it was really.
It's always useful. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I actually used an e-bike to get here for this conversation because it was faster, a lot faster than driving my car into a parking spot, which I have over at City Hall.
Yeah.
I could have driven to City Hall and walked 4 minutes down here. It was faster for me to take a bike. Once you realize that, you're like, why do I want to spend more time being in a car when it's a sunny day outside? So
one of the most important things that a government does is set a budget. We had a question on fiscal responsibility regarding the return on investment on government money. You highlighted a bit of that in your speech at the conference. What is the balance on quantitative and qualitative analysis for that? It was a question we got. In your aspirations, how can we measure positive impact on community in terms of human experience and access without falling into the pitfalls of more is better?
boy, that's a complicated question.
It was a good one.
Yeah. So, on the one hand, I think one of the traps of government, which is also one of the traps of less direct government, is we so often implicitly, it seems to me, that if we get a federal grant for something, we act like free money. Well, it's not free just because someone from Alaska and someone from Montana contributed to that pot, because when something happens in Montana, we're going to be contributing to that pot, right? So I think you have to justify every dollar that gets spent in government, and there's less scrutiny, I think, the further the money is away from the source. So the nice thing about being in the city of Grand Rapids is I'm pretty close to the people who are actually paying the taxes. And so if we spend non-justifiable amounts of money, it's pretty directly observable. So you've always got to be asking the ROI question. And I do. Years ago when I was on city commission, there was a proposal that we have a smell mitigation study on the sewage treatment plant. And then they wanted to spend millions of dollars mitigating the smell. And I was like, and they said, well, don't worry, we'll pay for it all with bonds. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that our sewage system smells. Like, I get that. I've observed that. I understand. But nobody lives around that plant in the radius that smells it. And I drive by it once in a while and I smell it. So I close my car windows. I don't want to spend millions of taxpayer dollars on a smell mitigation plant when if that's not going to get me something that people value, right? So doing those cost benefit but-for analyses, sometimes it's soft, like, how much do people value not smelling poop? hard to tell. You just have to be sort of intuitive on it. On the other hand, if you're looking at, getting a 2% return, let's say we decide, for example, one of the dreams I really am excited about is really investing in renewable energy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to have to justify the cost. If we invest in solar and it makes us a 0.5% return on our money and we're bonding at 6%, that's not really viable.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if we can bond, and because cities can get cheaper money than civilians can, if we can bond and do a major investment in solar that gets us, at or even above the bond rate, well, then you've got a great synergy.
Yeah.
So cost of borrowing is always got to be part of your conversation, as does return on investment, which comes down to durability, life cycle, all that fun stuff. Now, at the same time, and I think part of the question, which was, it was a good nuanced question, some things we do because they're valuable for the community and they don't have a direct payoff, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no payoff to my being able to take a walk along the river.
Mm-hmm.
But as a community, we have done a lot of, and we've got private developers like singing the same song, right? So the Three Towers project,
they see those amenities.
Absolutely. There's going to be great river connectivity in front of Three Towers. Now, that's not going to be a direct benefit for the it's going to be, some of it's going to be direct benefit for the Three Towers because the people who live there can go walk along the river, but so can you and I. Right. And so investment in that corridor, how do you quantify that? How do you put a price on it? Sometimes you've got
to make a judgment that that's going to contribute to the overall vibrancy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's harder the less directly. I have this conversation in my businesses a lot, is I get the fun of making an excellent product. I get the fun of, and I get the return on investment of hard assets. Easy to do the analysis. What's hard is to make yourself spend money on marketing because you don't know what worked or what didn't work and how it worked. And so it's way mushier. And so my business partners and I tend to be way less comfortable in that space because you can't quantify it as easily, right? We all know it works. We know other people are doing it. And so we should probably copy other people. But, there's a billboard in the right answer. Should you have a helicopter flying around town with a banner behind?
It comes back to that loyalty that you talked about, right? If people are seeing a responsive city with great amenities, they're going to go out and talk about it. That's the best marketing. Right. Probably.
Right.
Building off what you just mentioned, another question, you talked about federal funding. Does the city have a question we got? Does the city have a plan to support or partner with nonprofits if federal funding is compromised? There's a lot of that discussion in DC. How is that impacting the city as well? How are you planning for that?
Yeah, so there's two parts to that question. One, the good news is the city funding is pretty much not related to money coming in from the federal government. So if all federal funding dried up for everything, the city, we've done the math, we can take the hit. We're not going to change our models, our goals, and whatever based on whatever semi-coherent threats or saber rattling might be happening at other levels of government. So a lot of people are really stressed out about lots of things that are happening in government right now. But on the level of the city, like, are we going to be able to provide police support, fire support? Are we going to be able to keep building our roads? Are we going to be able to keep picking up trash? Are we going to be able to keep doing the things we're doing in the city? Yes, we can do those. Now, the nonprofit world is, I think, a lot more vulnerable right now. And some of our really important institutions are vulnerable because when you see grant money getting cut for science research, for example, there's a lot of real science research happening within a couple blocks of here. And so those funding things are threatening to the long-term future and prosperity of our country. But they're not. But the city does not have the resources to backstop all federal failed funding if federal funding starts failing all over the community. And we're really going to have to ask ourselves how we can, whether we can build models where we can afford to do things that get us. We don't want to let the great be the enemy of the good. So I'll give you an example. If at the city level, let's say we were short on funds and we thought really we would love to get flashing crosswalks all around town, which I do. They're a lot more expensive than putting up a sign that says, hey, it's the state law. You really have to stop for pedestrians here. So if we lost funding, we might just have to go to signs, not lights.
Mm-hmm.
If we, if we want to do, like roundabouts are a great traffic calming mechanism, and we've used a lot of them in town to good effect. They're more expensive than a four-way stop. A four-way stop costs you 4 pieces of red aluminum. So we may have to think about using four-way stops as traffic calming things rather than roundabouts, which cost more money. So there are ways in the city that I can see economizing if we had to think, like, if we can get 80% of our benefit by spending 10% of our money, and we don't get to 100%. I get that, sometimes you're going to have to ask those questions, and we're going to have to ask those in the nonprofit space too. Are we going to do what we can to support the nonprofits? Yes, but I'm not sure. I don't want to overpromise.
Right.
The reality is,
It's going to really be a community effort of talking about and advocating, yes, and understanding the impact and sharing that with our federal officials.
absolutely.
We have about 3 more questions. This one's on the master plan. How does the master plan that City Manager Mark Washington spoke about balance the needs of the city residents and outsiders that travel in to work and play?
I think the most of the emphasis of the master plan properly is on how we're going to make the city great for the people who live here. So that being said, there are no plans in there to get rid of any of our highways. And we are certainly talking about the value of some of the community hubs, if you want to call them that. I mean, but they're already going to happen. Like, we're going to have an amphitheater, we're going to have a soccer stadium. There are conversations, but at the same time, I think that we have to be I have to be sensitive to my first obligation is to make sure that this city is a great place to live for the people who live here and a great place to work for the people who work here. And so I think that making Grand Rapids a stronger and more vibrant community probably will make it more attractive for people to come visit.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I'm not building a playground for people who don't live in the city.
Question, what role does journalistic coverage of policy developments play in Grand Rapids community development? And in an era of media distrust and local news struggling, how is the state of Grand Rapids' information landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are trying to find new sources, and one of the things that I think has been great in Grand Rapids is cranes coming into town. I'm finding, so this is a shout out, I was not paid to say this, but Cranes Grand Rapids Business is a great shorthand way that I find to find out things that I might not have known about what are happening in town. So it's great to have that resource in town. Bridge Magazine is a really good source too, and it's free. I think that the question of, there's some tensions in journalism, and I don't want to throw shade here. I don't think we can emphasize enough how important a free and effective media is to keeping democracy working. We have to have a community where everyone is able to access the same basket of information for us to be able to make shared decisions based on full information. And that's a constant push and pull. So anything I can do to make things more accessible to the media, I tend to do, because democracy depends on it.
Well, the city's done a lot of different things to get the word out. Broadcasting, the different meetings. Your Mayor's Mondays is another example. You can always sign up through the Chamber News. Two is we're keeping tabs on local government as it pertains to business. But getting that information out there, people are looking for it. Just like this question talks about local news struggling. We're not getting the same kind of coverage of local government that we did 20 years ago.
Right.
And there's an appetite for it.
Yeah. So I think maybe some of this is, you're right, the question of direct action. So like the city has a really accessible website where you can watch all the city commission meetings, and you can even jump to parts of them, because like the City Connect thing says, if you want to see the Public Safety Commission meeting, here you go. Right. So you can jump around. But it's also true that like our Mayor's Mondays has gone great, and I will pitch that a second. It's mayorsmondays.com. First Monday we're in the first ward, second Monday we're in the second ward, third Monday we're in the third ward, and we rotate around. We're never going to stop doing it, and we're talking about big basket policy things. And so if you want to come talk about anything, you can come to a Mayor's Mondays. And the difference between that and City Commission is you don't get 3 minutes on a shot clock. You actually get a conversation. Like I will talk with folks about things.
That's great.
And so will the other sort of panelists who we have assembled around these big basket issues. So we're talking about big policy things, justice, housing, neighborhood development, and we just keep doing it. And people are showing up. And so we may have to build a more organic way to spread information. And it also means it's more incumbent on the city itself, on me and other electeds and the whole city architecture to do a better job of information sharing rather than thinking, I mean, in the past, maybe you could be a little more passive about it. The news people will find you and they will ask you questions and they will write a story. And so, we have to, and the chamber is part of it too. Like this is part of it, right?
Right.
This is not media. This is the chamber and me having a conversation that we hope people will watch. So we may have to frankly just help on the information front in ways that we didn't have to in the past.
It needs to be more accessible, more transparent. So to close us out, we had a question on A250, which is celebrating America's 250th birthday, which is going to be coming up in 2026. How should we celebrate America's 250th and Grand Rapids' 175th birthday? Seems like a great opportunity to build loyalty and enhance civic engagement.
Yeah, I am most excited, and those of people can go watch my State of the City on my Facebook page. But I ended that speech by talking about how important it is that we reinforce the institution of democracy itself, and that cities can be a great place for that to happen. I think that celebrating America's birth and celebrating Grand Rapids' birth is a great time for us to say, what is the American experiment about? How can we the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln sort of talked about recommitting yourself to democracy. I think that these are kinds of moments when we can say, we all should recommit ourselves to the business of working together, lifting each other up, working collaboratively, not getting into Ben Sass, who is a U.S. senator, wrote a book where he said, too much in America now, we're breaking it to communities that are defined negatively. They're defined by who you're mad at, not who you're friends with. And we need to really think of this as a moment to think about our community as one where we ask ourselves, how can we be friends with everybody, not who am I mad at? And because that's what makes democracy work. It's not a grievance-based system. It is a collaboration-based system, and recommitting ourselves to that and thinking about how we can build that kind of culture of collaboration and mutual support. I think it's a great opportunity to have those conversations.
To foster that more perfect union, right? Absolutely. Recognizing we haven't gotten it right in the past. We're going to continue to make mistakes, but we need to continue focus on making it better. You highlighted in the State of the City that maybe more dog parks will bring people together so they can talk about that. But I think that is so true. The more we can get away from the screens where people are thinking about who they're mad at or being told who they should be mad at, to have real conversations about how they can improve their community is key. So, Mayor, thank you so much for this time, answering these questions that we got from our event, and all you're doing to try to make more thriving and prosperous Grand Rapids for everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you. And if you need more information, be sure you're signed up for the Grand Rapids Chamber's newsletter. You can do so at grandrapids.org. Thank you so much.